This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for March 12th, 2019, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
Hey, what's up, Cuboids?
Cristina Roach.
Hey, everyone.
And producer Pat.
Hi, checkers.
The Core 4 is back, and we have a great show for you today. Cristina is going to explore what in the world are the J.D. Power Awards. And then Adam is going to look into the origin of the term Hocus Pocus.
That's right.
Abracadabra next week. But first, ancient Egypt, says Darren. Nice to be back after an amazing trip to Egypt and Jordan. And given that we've rarely discussed ancient Egypt, and I was just there, well, not ancient Egypt, I was in present-day Egypt. I didn't have a time machine or a Stargate. I thought it was a good time to present some myths and facts.
The Stargate does not travel through time, it travels through space. I'm only speaking for the movie. I haven't watched all of the TV series.
And of course, space and time are linked through space-time, so you're being redundant, Adam. My main source for most of this information is a Great Courses audio lecture series by Bob Breyer. Truly excellent. Thanks, Bob. But there are also some links in the show notes that have nice and easy to read lists of myths at trcpodcast.com.
It's a great website.
Mm-hmm. Let's discuss the big one first. I mean, I'm not saying it's aliens, but aliens. Come on. Who Quick anecdote. I was in the National Museum in Cairo, and I overheard a tourist say to their Egyptian guide, "Do you think the Egyptians were part alien?"
What does that mean?
I know. Like the top half? The guide responded, "Well, anything's possible." And then
not true.
Well, it's sort of true.
This is what Entourage was talking about, right?
And then, a good point. And then the guy said something about how we know some things and how we don't know everything, which is true, but then not necessarily substantiating the point whether the aliens or not.
Yes.
And I say, boo. I think he should give his ancestors more credit.
Yes.
At 138 meters, the Great Pyramid at Giza is about as tall as a 45-story building.
Wow.
Slightly taller than was created. And was the tallest man-made structure for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. Also, it was built in 20 years or less, which is mind-blowing.
Oh, yeah, because some churches took way longer than that to build.
Or now.
Yeah.
Also, it's relatively close to downtown Cairo, meaning a 20 to 30-minute drive.
Oh.
So, yes, you could be living in an apartment building which has a view of the pyramids. They are not far out in the desert.
Oh, cool.
That's a myth along the way.
Yeah.
Anyway, when people say aliens did it, it diminishes the social, organizational, and technical skills that the ancient Egyptians had, and humanity in general. Higher mathematics was actually not necessary, but precision and care was. So they didn't need advanced math, they were just really, really precise in terms of how they laid everything out. There were no mortars involved. They just put the blocks in place. That's how impressive it is. About 2 million of them.
Wow.
Okay, so if aliens didn't build the pyramids, smarty pants, then how? How do you move 2 million blocks weighing from 2 to more than 60 tons into the shape of a pyramid, we'll say? That is a good question, and in fact, there's no agreed upon theory, but aliens are not part of it. Mm-hmm. Quoting Wikipedia, Egyptian pyramid construction techniques are the controversial subject of many hypotheses. These techniques seem to have developed over time. Later pyramids were not constructed in the same way as earlier ones. Most of the construction hypotheses are based on the belief that huge stones were carved from quarries with copper chisels, and these blocks were then dragged and lifted into position. Disagreements chiefly concern the methods used to move and place the stones. Pseudoscientific theories have proliferated in the vacuum of official explanations. Thank you, Wikipedia.
So have those quarries been identified, and are they close to where those pyramids lie?
I believe they're close enough, but after learning and thinking about this for a bit, I'm not going to cover this today as it would take up all the time, and I want to get to other interesting ideas, but maybe in the future. But right now, who knows how they built the pyramids? Doesn't mean aliens built the pyramids.
Sure. I think John offered a theory back when we were in the booth a long time ago at Carleton.
The last time we talked about was when John went to Egypt.
I guess it's not something that comes up that often.
Right. Okay, so if it wasn't aliens, it was slaves, right? I actually just heard this today when I went on a walk with a friend. Wow. I said, no, slaves did not build the pyramids either. Laborers were on site, lived on site, and were even buried next to the pyramids. Nothing shows that they were slaves or treated terribly. If they weren't the slaves, then who were all those Israelites that were in slavery in Egypt? Well, ancient Egyptians kept a lot of records, and none show lots of Israelite slaves. Oh. There is no archaeological evidence to back this up, or the plagues from the Bible, Shocking.
Took
As
the
well,
words right out of my mouth.
I know. I was willing to accept the frogs, but not the locusts. As well, if there had been slaves and they were eventually free and left, it would massively disrupt their economy. Again, no record of this. This doesn't line well with the biblical story of Moses and Ramses II. A series of plagues visiting Egypt obviously isn't true. Now, to be fair, the whole idea of the Nile turning red with blood can be partially explained perceptually in the sense of the Nile would appear different colors depending on the vegetation or sediment in it, and the Nile actually flows north to south, so it would be coming up from a southern part, like Sudan, current-day Sudan, and some of that soil and sediment was more red. So at certain times, the Nile would almost seem to go from blue to red, which someone might mistake for blood, but that's not what was happening.
Interesting.
I watched the movie Exodus, the epic by Ridley Scott, before I left, and it starts with the statement that 400,000 Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. Nope. Bob Breyer thinks it's one of those things that maybe there were 10, maybe there were 20 slaves somewhere being transported at some time, and it just grew and grew into literally mythical proportions.
Wow.
Now, another little tidbit, Egyptians were not desert people. They lived and thrived by the Nile, as opposed to conspiracy theorists who live and thrive by denial. What? Hi-oh.
Oh, boy.
I'm back. All that to say, they didn't ride camels out in the desert. People in Jordan did that, Bedouin people do that, but not the Egyptians. So if you see camels in photos with the pyramids, it isn't historically accurate. That said, there are camels around the pyramids because that's what people think, and I took a photo and it looks great, but it's not really representative of historical Egypt.
So the camels that are near the pyramids are kind of just there for the tourists, or they do have camels in the area?
Well, I'm not sure now, but I definitely think it's touristy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What about King Tut? I'm sure you've heard of him. He was young, died when he was like 18 or 19, and everyone knows his name. And the main reason is that his tomb was found largely intact. Mm-hmm. Most of the other tombs of famous kings, including those who built those huge pyramids, were looted over the centuries. King Tut's was filled with many different objects, an abundance of gold and information. It wasn't completely unlooted, so to speak, but there were different chambers, and the final chamber, I think, was largely intact. So I think that's the reason, the only reason, you actually know about him more than, say, any other king. Quick question for the panel. Can you name any other king of Egypt?
Sure. Cheops?
Yeah. Cheops, which is Snefru. Sorry. Yes. Yep. Different names for different things.
Nefertiti? Is that a queen?
That's not bad. Correct. Yeah. Look at Adam. What about Toronto? Let's save some for Toronto.
From Mummies Alive was a cartoon.
You're like, does Cleopatra count? Sort of. But that's it. People know King Tut.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's many, many other ones. And like, he didn't build that massive pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what about Napoleon and his troops shooting off the nose of the Sphinx?
That's a good one.
While it is true various foreigners, especially Christians, damaged a lot of Egyptian temples and tombs, as we were shown repeatedly by guides, here you can see a figure, and the face is literally scratched out in the rock. They've just removed a lot of the faces from a lot of things.
Because they were blasphemous somehow, or why?
Yeah, something like that. I didn't get a full explanation. He blamed it on the Christians. I'm not sure exactly the Christians, but it's entirely plausible it was.
Yeah.
It is incorrect to say that Napoleon or his troops shot the nose off the Sphinx when they were trying to conquer Egypt around the year 1800. He didn't succeed, by the way, conquering Egypt, but he told everyone he did. Actually, the British did. They made fun of him in their press because they knew he lied. So how do we know he didn't do this? Well, sketches from Frederick Louis Norden, who was a Dane, published in 1757, but actually sketched decades earlier, show the nose to have been damaged. This is well before Napoleon arrived, and in fact, was even before Napoleon was born.
Do they have sketches of it undamaged?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
It is possible it actually wasn't vandalism at all, but erosion due to weather damage. The nose sticks out the most and is most subject to falling off. Much of the rest of the Sphinx has actually been underwater at different times. So it's possible there are no culprits at all. Now, it also could be damage. It's hard to think back over thousands of years when these things were created, but I believe the water table was much, much higher in the past. And as such, that's also how the pyramids might have been more easily built, using hydraulic power in different ways.
Now, that water erosion idea, I think, plays into a conspiracy theory that dates the Sphinx back to, 10,000, 13,000 years instead of its actual dating.
That's junk.
So there was water more recently than that? Is that kind of the easy explanation? I heard maybe it was sand erosion as well.
Sand erosion too. There is some water, but that 10,000 year thing about the Sphinx is completely inaccurate.
Sure.
So says Bob Breyer, Egyptologist. What about the pharaoh's death leading to servants and the family being buried with him? Well, there is evidence of this happening at least a couple times. This was not a common practice. Now, the Egyptians truly thought they were going to live another life in their death, which is why they tried to take so much of their stuff with them. As Bob said, if you're going to a new country, a new place, what do you take? You take everything. Do I need an umbrella? Sure. Do I need different shoes? Okay.
When I was a child,
you never know. We know what's going to get there.
when I was a child, I had this idea of like going on a field trip to heaven, and it was like you pack your suitcases and you go, and there's a line of kids that walk out into the street and get hit by a car,
right?
And then you're in heaven, and then you got to make sure your suitcases don't drop on the clouds because they'll fall through. This was my elaborate story.
Before I learned Mario could walk on clouds.
That explains a few things.
I went to a Christian school, all right?
So we've learned a lot about the Egyptians precisely because of this belief, and therefore they would decorate their tombs and have so many objects in their mummification and burial processes that it was far more informative than other cultures. Now, sacrifices and offerings still have to be made, though, so it is possible, if you're in ancient Egypt and you had the wealth, you would pay someone in land or money to take care of your tomb and make offerings. And if your endowment was big enough, you'd actually pay them enough that their children would do it too, after they died. Got to protect your investment.
Just because labor was so cheap, or people were just so rich, there's such an income disparity, or wealth disparity.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Now, what about the brain versus the heart? Theme and effect of altruism. Modern Western science thinks of the brain as having the utmost importance, so much so that death in a medical context means brain death. And my favorite philosopher, Dennett, also has this line that when you're getting a brain transplant, that's one of those times you definitely want to be the donor. Now, we know that the brain is what provides control and oversight over all their bodily functions. Yes, okay, spinal cord aficionados, you can write in. But in ancient Egypt, they did not have this belief. The heart was, well, the heart of the matter. It is where your emotions came from, which makes intuitive sense if you think about excitement or anger or even sadness. It's in your heart rate or even your torso where you seem to feel it, not your brain. So the heart had your personality and your intelligence and pretty much everything else. As such, it wasn't removed during mummification, unlike the other organs. Yeah. Brain, on the other hand, who cares about the brain? Let's scoop that out with a hook. So they went through a hole in the nose, sort of, if you picture like a knitting needle, I assume just jammed it around a bit, and then likely turned the head over so it just dripped out.
Oh,
wow.
Nasty.
Oh, well.
Like someone might faint on a plane with this episode, too.
Apologies.
Anyway, there's a lot of interesting things in Egypt, in ancient Egypt, and I had a delightful trip, but those are some of the tidbits of facts and myths that I want to share with you.
This definitely disagrees with what I've learned from a number of Roland Emmerich films. Just going to put that out there.
And I certainly don't know what in the world are the J.D. Power Awards, so hopefully I'll be enlightened.
Well, many moons ago on episode 310, Pat did some stellar investigative reporting into vanity awards after my music publicity company was supposedly chosen for a Distinguished Business Award. My skeptical spidey sense kicked in, of course, especially when they asked for money to pay for a physical trophy, that I could proudly display in my office. After Pat did some digging, though, we both realized the scope of this bogus vanity award scam, which he covers on that show. Highly recommend. It's a really great segment.
Yeah.
But fast forward to last week, and a car commercial that keeps popping up while we watch the U.S. feed of a basketball game. The commercial claimed proudly that the car received awards from J.D. Power and Associates. Now, this has become so ubiquitous in car ads that I've never batted an eye. I can't tell you how many times I've seen or heard that. But for some reason last week, Pat and I looked at each other at the same time and asked, what the F is J.D. Power and Associates? Now, has the Ottawa crew ever heard of them?
Yes, and it's just like I keep hearing about these companies that I don't know what they do, kind of like miscellaneous contracting companies. I guess a lot of times they're maybe accounting firms who just award things or evaluate things. And I guess J.D. Power is a famous one. I've heard of Ernst & Young doing the same. And there are probably tons more. But I think it's kind of annoying. My wife probably doesn't totally agree because she's an accountant. But yeah, I think it's all silly.
So I'm not sure if I have. I mean, now that we've said it enough times, like that sounds like it rings a bell. But quite frankly, I don't know anymore.
For the rest of the week, Darren, every ad you're going to see is going to say J.D. Power and Associates, or you just
voted
watch.
best whatever by J.D. Power and Associates. They're better than 9 out of 10 dentists.
Well, they were founded in 1968, and the company is a legit company. It's a California-based market researcher that conducts surveys of customer satisfaction and product quality in a variety of industries. But it seems best known for research on new car quality and dependability. So I'm not going to get into the whole company history. You can find a link if you're interested in our show notes at trcpodcast.com.
Well, that's a good website.
The boys are back in town. But yes, founder James David Power was a real guy. Now, according to Wikipedia, its service offerings include industry-wide syndicated studies, proprietary research, consulting, training, and automotive forecasting. The reason companies like to brag about getting an award from J.D. Power is because the award has become synonymous with a track record of quality and reliability. So if you get one, or 16, like General Motors bragged in a full-page ad, it gives the impression your company is awesome and should be trusted. Just ask J.D. Power. They will tell you on their website they have the world's most trusted consumer ratings. So I'm going to work back from the punchline here. 1, they fund and do their own research, then make that data available, or more to the point, sell it at a premium to the industries covered in their research. 2, companies that were evaluated have to pay J.D. Power to use its name in their ads. That one surprised me a little bit. Word on the street, it's not cheap.
Yeah.
3, they make additional revenue by selling crystal trophies to companies who are given top-ranking honors. I don't know if the first one is free, but I really don't think that's the point here.
Crystal trophies. Cool.
SF Gate, a sister publication to the San Francisco Chronicle, reported on JD many years ago, and the exec VP at the time, and also the founder's son, told them he's not worried about a perceived conflict arising from JD Power and Associates taking money from companies it judges. Quote, "We have walls set up in our organization that separate the different business divisions from these issues." End quote. Now,
what does that even mean?
Right. Consumer advocates, on the other hand, say having a financial relationship with companies you claim you independently review is, well, not kosher. Ken McEldowney, executive director of consumer action in San Francisco, had this to say, quote, "Some consumers might wonder if J.D. Power gives awards only to companies that can pay thousands of dollars in licensing fees." Now, Mike Graywit, a J.D. Power spokesman, says there's nothing inappropriate about that. Quote, "It's no different from any company that licenses its name for use on a product. Disney, for example, licenses its name. So does Coca-Cola." Okay. There's obviously a big distinction here. Disney or Coke doesn't promote themselves as neutral arbiters of other companies' services or products.
Absolutely. Coca-Cola is not telling people that Pepsi is the best cola.
Right. And anyways, so how much do you guys charge? Well, he says that's proprietary.
Oh.
So, lucky for me, writer Eric Schilling did a great detailed breakdown in Gizmodo's Jalopnik titled Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About the J.D. Power Awards. And it's actually quite interesting, so check it out. For the sake of time, I'm covering a Cole's Notes, or Cliff Notes version, as our U.S. friends say. Now, Schilling asks in his article, what do companies get out of paying J.D. Power good money? One incentive is that it can be lucrative for car makers' employees, as many have some part of their compensation tied to winning.
Oh, wow.
Uh-huh.
So the company gets to pay twice.
Hashtag winning.
Now, mainly it's access to their market research. And according to David Sargent, the company's VP of Global Automotive, automakers buy into it because the company has a track record and their research has turned out to be accurate. And he goes on to say, quote, "There's also the external horse race element to it that everyone wants to win." And he's talking about those snazzy crystal trophies. As Schilling breaks down, there are 2 key measures used to judge quality in deciding award winners. One is the Vehicle Dependability Study, where VDS asks car owners about issues in the first 3 years of owning a vehicle. And then there is the Initial Quality Study, which asks owners about any issues specific to the first 90 days of ownership. According to Sargent, IQS is the most prominent one and, quote, That's the one automakers would give almost anything to win. They take it extremely seriously, end quote. Now, J.D. Power VP Pete Marlowe goes on to say the car makers that were ranked highest wanted to stay ahead and would engage us for best practices and continuous improvement to stay ahead of the competition. Now, car makers who did not do well would hire us to better understand how to drive their performance forward. That's to finish Marlowe's quote. Case in point, in defense of Power, a Vox article relays a story from Popular Mechanics' Ezra Dyer, who a few years back was at the Kia factory in Georgia, and employees told him that J.D. Power's IQS report helped them become aware of a design flaw pointed out by customers. As a result, they changed the design the following year so the info collected by the survey was helpful to Kia. They didn't just say this in general, oh yeah, they helped us last year. They literally cited example about, it was the Sorrento, and it had to do with the back windshield wiper, I believe. There was a button, and they were saying we'd rather have a rotary, whatever. So it actually was input that was valuable to the company changing the design flaw. Now, another thing you should know is J.D. Power has some rules about advertising, including not allowing the use of words like winner, because that implies there's a loser.
The world's full of losers.
So they prefer language like most reliable or top ranked. Ads are vetted by Power before airing it. And if you don't think they have that much leverage yet, here's a little story for you guys. Early on, the ad agency for Chrysler wanted to run a full-page newspaper ad saying one of its cars was better than 5 other models it apparently beat. But the ad was rejected. Now, Chrysler dug in its heels and said J.D. Power had no say in the matter because they paid for the data, the campaign was factually accurate, end of story. Sargent replied that if Chrysler went ahead and ran the rejected ad, J.D. Power would run their own ad that put the satisfaction scores of Chrysler in the context of all cars, not just the 5 cherry-picked by the agency for the ad.
Snap.
So from J.D. Power's point of view, I don't think their motivation is just completely altruistic. If that ad goes out, J.D. Power data smears 5 car companies that they want to get money from.
Right.
Right? Like,
True.
it's all about the almighty dollar, you know?
I'm sure you've guessed by now that Chrysler did not run with that ad.
Of course.
So what have we learned? Well, as always, don't take any claim at face value. Sure, you won a few awards, but what does that really mean? Hearing a company is winner of 3 J.D. Power Initial Quality Test Awards only means something because we've been told it does. So we've also learned this type of business practice is very lucrative. According to the New York Times, the company was sold in 2016 to a private equity firm for $1.1 billion.
Wow.
Triple its worth from 10 years prior. I wonder how many crystal trophies that would get you.
The participant award is especially good.
Well, it sounds like they do some reasonable research and surveys and stuff like that, but that
Yes.
they're very cautious not to offend any particular car company because they've monetized it, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Maybe they can afford to do decent research and still make a huge profit margin on what is essentially like kind of a racket, right? Maybe to do shoddy research wouldn't have the same impact.
It's pretty brilliant when you think about it.
If it's a private investment firm, I believe they would be prizing financial rewards over research integrity.
Of course.
Sure,
Of course.
Thank you, Cristina. And now to Adam with some magic.
Have you ever wondered where the term Hocus Pocus came from?
Nope.
I never did.
not until today.
No. Yeah, never asked myself that question. But recently, I was reading 21 Rules for the 21st Century by Yuval Noah Harari. Decent book, but something was mentioned in passing that seemed hard to swallow, so I thought I'd look it up. And this was the origin of the term Hocus Pocus. As the story goes, as was explained in the book, it was a perversion of Latin spoken during communion in Christian Mass, and this goes back to the Last Supper. Now, let me clarify that these events likely didn't happen, and if they did, Jesus was not the Son of God and did not actually transform bread into flesh or wine into blood. But that's the story. That's how they tell it. That's what the Mass is about. So Jesus takes out some bread and says, "For this is my body," which in Latin is hoc sit enim corpus meum. The lay person who doesn't speak Latin, not to disparage people who don't speak Latin, as I also do not speak this language. They don't.
I wish you disparaged them in Latin, so only they would know.
There you go. Now, they didn't necessarily understand what was being said, but as this incantation of sorts is said, there is a magical transformation of bread, or in most cases in masses, some sort of communion wafer, into the body of Christ, and wine into his blood. Hoc set enim corpus meum becomes hocus pocus. And then that term gets used for further incantations. So, is this legit? Well, maybe. The question was tackled by Cecil of the Straight Dope back in 1999. The term dates to the 17th century. The Oxford English Dictionary tells the origin as being a phrase told by a 1619 magician called Hocus Pocus, who would use faux Latin during his act. Hocus Pocus, tontus, talentus, vade, celeriter, jubeo. The story itself is not necessarily incompatible with the other origin story. There's no doubt that this was a sort of sham Latin used by magicians, jugglers, and other such entertainers, as it's still done today. For a conjurer to take this term as a name could either mean that he originated the term, or used one that was already in use at the time, because of some misinterpretation of communion, for example. The claim that this was a misrepresentation of the Latin told in communion goes back to 1694, so that's not some new thing that people are saying. This was speculated by Anglican prelate John Tillotson. Variations from certain countries seem to support this idea. In the Netherlands, Hocus Pocus is followed by Pilatus Pass, which is similar to the credo Sub Pontio Pilato Passis et Sepultus Set, meaning under Pontius Pilate he suffered and was buried. Other languages have similar twists on their own version, so they'll say Hocus Pocus something else, and then that something else will relate to something that's said in their particular mass or their particular creed. Now, another take is that it's derived from Hocus Pocus, a Norse magician, and there are a lot of other possible origins. So this mass one is one of them, and it's plausible, but it isn't really definitive. We can plausibly say that this could have been a misunderstanding of words said in mass, and if this is the case, which hasn't definitively been proven, but it's possible, we don't actually know by who it would have been corrupted or misunderstood, so we can't really get to the bottom of that either. While it may simply be that the masses didn't understand Latin, it may also have been a deliberate wordplay by people who actually did understand what was being said. Alternatively, I've seen it suggested that it was children who may first have coined the term, and as a father of a nearly 2-year-old, I know that a child can easily mangle a word upon repetition, and children often do enjoy word plays and rhyming and things like that, so something that's Latin that's kind of hard to understand can just become Hocus Pocus because it's easier to say, and it's just something they hear. I heard the adults say Hocus Pocus, Hocus Pocus, Hocus Pocus, and then that gets repeated. Maybe the adult repeats it because the child says it and it's cute, and who knows, it takes off. So, we don't really know. That's just one sort of speculation of how it could have been. It could have been deliberate, it could have been accidental, it could have been an enlightened person, it could have been an uneducated person saying it, whatever. Impossible to tease it out specifically without a time machine, but if we get one of those, it'll just create a whole bunch of more questions for me. So much to say, and also, it'll pollute the timeline, and it'll be a mess, and we'll have a different expression.
The timeline.
So much to say, I won't tell you that Hocus Pocus was based on Latin from Christian communion. It might be, but it also might not be. The story is plausible, but due to the age of the term, it's hard to prove conclusively. It certainly makes for an interesting story, although without even knowing who corrupted the term or why, we can't even use it to mock any particular denomination or person, as the intentions ultimately just aren't known.
Well, thank you, Adam. And thank you for joining us once again, listeners. I talked to you about ancient Egypt and how it was pretty great because they built those big triangles out of old rocks. Cristina looked at the J.D. Power Awards, and it's a semi-legitimate, semi-sketchy series of awards that you can get. Congratulations, car companies. And Adam looked into the origins of the word Hocus Pocus, which are themselves out of focus. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smart-assy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Oh, thanks.
And producer Pat.
Hey. Sorry. Darren.
Hey.
Let me check the...
Producer note, you suck right now, so
Darren's a little...
It sounds like their way of operating is that all cars are equal, but some are more equal than others.
They don't say it out
I've been on
loud.
this show for 7 years waiting to make an Animal Farm reference.
Oh, I didn't get it.
I didn't get it either, and
But that's because it was actually...
I can hear it now. Well done, Pat.
Aw, he's sulking.